All this dictates to me that doesn't care about Greenland. This is just a show. It's a distraction, and it also drives up profits. And both those things are to his interest. And we play into both of them when we give him so much credence. He's taco for a reason. He doesn't do what he says. He always promises force, promises he'll do something, and then he does nothing. I think he's just trying out the audience to see what the reaction will be.
Our special guest today is Jason Smart. Jonathan Fink, as always, is my co-host, or I'm his co-host. Depends how you look at it. And we're going to be talking mostly about Ukraine, which we have unfortunately not talked enough about recently because of the incredible negative catastrophes going on here in the United States and in Europe in reference to the Donald Trump organization. Anyway, Jason, welcome to our live stream today. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you as well.
It seems to me that Greenland, whether it was going to go ahead or whether it was not, was very contingent on how Europe would react. And Europe has managed to react strongly enough, perhaps, to deter immediate kinetic action on that front. But I think if we take a step back, we have to ask ourselves the question, and we have the perfect guest to pose that question too. Has this whole thing been a giant distraction to take attention away from Ukraine, to take resources away from Ukraine, including the air defense? And can we link Greenland this year with the drone incursions last year? Because it seems to me, at least, that one of the net benefits to Russia, amongst many, of the drone incursions in Europe last year was to force Europe to hoard its air defense and lower the volume of supply. Now, we know that the US has entirely cut Patriot replacements off. It just seems to luckily have coincided prior to this winter period and the huge campaign. But are we missing the underlying strategic purpose of all this supposed chaos?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that there's probably a lack of strategy coming from Donald Trump. I don't think that there's any sort of grand plan because, in the course of his life, I don't see that he's ever executed something that took more than a couple steps. I don't give him so much credit to think that there's something large. I think it could be much more simple. One is I think that if we look at a lot of the decisions he's made, we see what the New York Times editorial board said this morning, which is he and his family has self-enriched over $1.5 million, $1.3 million, or billion dollars, sorry, 1.3 or $5 billion since the beginning of his presidency a year ago today. I think that's something that's very motivational to him, is how to make money out of this. It seems very clear. As somebody who throughout his whole career has been essentially a con man, a scammer, this is probably, you go through all the shows, you take all the things, precautions necessary to look like you're legitimate and serious. Becoming the U.S. president is a very good way of doing that. And then you can start shaking down whoever you want. When we see them actively shaking down countries throughout Asia, the Middle East, very clearly in the Middle East, and globally. So this is just a shakedown, I think, of European countries, as well as a shakedown of the distraction that it provides. This is a news cycle that constantly covers whatever Donald Trump discusses or says. He realized whenever he lambasts things or says something really off the wall publicly, it draws attention to that issue and not to the issue that doesn't want to be covered. Look back when he started about a year ago, talking about Greenland actively. He had a very long press conference. It was about 2 hours long, where he just sort of rambled. There was no points to it. It was totally not what a normal person would say. It sounds like you just had to put him up there and he said, talk about this for 2 hours. And he did. Now, what's interesting about that, though, was why it happened that day at that time. It's because that day there was a ruling in New York that was against him, and that would have made him look bad. But nobody in the world talked about that ruling in New York at the court case. Everybody covered Greenland. Let's look back at 2015. He was very close to losing the primaries to Cruz. Cruz realized that he was down in the poll just a little bit, but he was rising and Trump was descending. If Cruz was able to successfully get out a message talking about the economy and how he would lower taxes, all the data suggested he would win the Republican primary and he would have beaten Hillary Clinton. But Donald, and I want to say it was like at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, Cruz was going to announce his new economic plan, which is written with a group of Nobel laureates and other people who are quite serious. But what happened at 9:55 on Tuesday was Donald Trump started tweeting that Ted Cruz's father killed John Kennedy. You can be sure that not one person at the press conference mentioned the economic plan, didn't ask one detail about it. They asked him why his dad killed Kennedy. That's what the story was. So Donald Trump does this incessantly, all the time. So I think there's only two motivations that we could realistically be. One is economic in nature. Can't rule that out. The most money that he's made, his family's made during his presidency, has been related to crypto. Sure enough, when you create panic in the markets, people take out their money and they try to convert their liquidity into things like crypto. We've seen that crypto's done really well during all these panics. He personally will make money as a result of that. So I think that's a very likely thing. It's a very tangible thing, and he likes tangible things. So I think it's a very like high probability to be something so simple and so straightforward as that, or the other side, which is that he's trying to distract. This Epstein scandal has been very bad for him. In fact, it's so bad that it's the only issue that Republicans really have started to question his leadership is this. So if you realize this is really undermining your presidency, nobody cares about Greenland. I mean, I don't think that's going to upset anyone. If you don't like him to begin with, you're going to say you don't like him now. If you don't know where Greenland is, you're not going to care about it later. Only 4% of the U.S. population wants military force against Greenland if necessary. Some polls say it's as high as 14, but it's probably realistically less. Amongst Republicans, there's very, very low support for the Greenland thing. Only 3 senators have come out. Out of the 100 senators, 3 have come out with something positive about taking Greenland or acquiring Greenland. 3. And there's a Republican majority. All this dictates to me that doesn't care about Greenland. This is just a show. It's a distraction, and it also drives up profits. And both those things are to his interest. And we play into both of them when we give him so much credence. He's taco for a reason. He doesn't do what he says. He always promises force, promises he'll do something, and then he does nothing. I think he's just trying out the audience to see what the reaction will be.
Well, I'll jump on what Jason said there, because this
Sure.
is interesting. There's endless geopolitical analysis. We're trying to look at this 4D chess. How's Putin influencing Trump? How is he getting narratives in there to try and persuade him that Greenland's an idea? This is an old Soviet trick, by the way. They always try to create friction around Greenland and these strategic assets in the Arctic. So this isn't a new playbook for Russia. It's quite an old one, in fact. Except this time it's getting traction, whereas in the Cold War it didn't work because allies were a little bit more allied, let's say. So if we put to one side that this isn't some kind of extraordinary 3-dimensional chess, and that actually Putin is taking the advantages where he can, he doesn't have a big long-term plan. Trump is doing the same. Is it worth descending into the sort of psychology of Goodfellas or something here? Is Trump's strategy literally as basic in that and the so-called board of peace to say, like, nice country you got there, shame if something happened to it, cough up and we'll make sure that your nice country stays looking nice? Yeah, so this is a shakedown. This is just a shakedown, right?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to that. As much as I don't give him so much credit, I think that we can't say, I don't think we dissect enough really a meta-analysis of what it all means. So we can come to a conclusion that somebody is stupid. We can come to a conclusion that somebody's dishonest. We can come to a conclusion that somebody is pro-Russian. But one of these things is probably going to be the dominant force that's driving decision-making. Now, I think that in his case, from everything I've seen his life story before the presidency, he doesn't have any ideology that I can identify. I mean, other than the fact that I actually knew a guy who did a serious study about what he's said since the 1970s about different issues. The only issue he's been really uniform on is that China's bad, and that tariffs are a good thing. He's been really clear on that. Outside of that, there's really nothing else. I mean, back in the 80s, he was saying that, so it's not new. Back then, it's Japanese he talked a lot more about. But either way, it was tariffs are a very good thing. Okay, we see that reflected today. But there's something else that I think that is ideologically consistent, is that he finds whatever way possible to make money. And we see that he is very rash in decision-making throughout his whole life. We see that he's very flippant. Look at even the business decisions, how many companies have gone broke, or projects. I'm not even the big companies. I mean, he himself's gone broke, but talk about the really big projects or even the small projects, such as, Trump Vodka, Trump University, choose the one that's gone bust. We see that all the time. So I don't think he has a lot of consistency. It's not like he has a dream of building this. Somebody pitched him an idea. He said, yeah, sure, give it a shot. Let's see if it makes some money.
Trump steaks, Trump vodka, Trump. Oh, the list is as long as you're on.
Trump vodka. Yeah, so all these different things. Trump vineyards. So anyways, I think that there's a Trump Airlines, which is my favorite one, just because I read an article with the interview, I should say, with the people who helped start the Trump airline. And they said that in the meetings, not once did he want to look at the spreadsheets, the Excel sheets. He would just say, show me a picture of the model airplane. And they'd show him a picture and they'd say, make Trump bigger on the back of it. Everybody should be able to see Trump. And I was like, and I think that, and it's anecdotal, of course, but still, I think that does highlight the sort of person he is. I think he thinks about the headline. He doesn't think about the text in the article. He thinks about the headline that's going to come from it. And so I think when we're talking about something like Greenland or even Russia, I actually do push back that he himself is pro-Russian. I don't agree with that. I think he's pro-money. He's happy to go wherever that is. Why limit yourself to Russia when you can get it from other sources as well? If it happens to help X country instead of Y country, he'll do that. I don't think he's tied to Russia. I don't see any clear idea that he's ideologically tied. I think he will do things that are against the interest of the United States or against Ukraine because he sees a buck in it. But that's not because he's in favor of those people as much as he views them as potential for making a profit. And it's just that simple. I think that's really the dominant driver. So that's why I disagree with a lot of people who, for the past year, have really been losing their stuff, saying, oh, it's because of this. Let's be more simple. You can't be both strategic and at the same time truly in your economic interest. You can be one or the other. If you're strategically interested in helping Russia, you wouldn't do a lot of the things he's done. But if you're really just looking out for yourself all the time in every situation, you can have the sort of maneuver as he does. He goes one extreme or the other extreme, does something that doesn't make sense at all, something that sort of hurts Russia, but then another thing that sort of helps Russia. No, he's trying to figure out how to profit from this.
No, I agree with you. And there's been a lot written about that recently. I've been saying for, well, as long as he's been alive, that the key word with him is moron. He doesn't have an ideology. You know this, Jason. You're pretty much saying that. He doesn't have an ideology. He doesn't think strategically because he doesn't think. He does knee-jerk reactions to whatever happens at the time. If it upsets him, if it pisses him off, if it makes him happy, angry, then he reacts to that. And sometimes that aligns with the ideology of the Kremlin, but that's only like a broken clock that's right twice a day. It's just happenstance. It's not that he really thinks about Kremlin ideology and Putin and historic Russia. He doesn't know any of that. He just does what he does because it feels good at the time. And it's always what makes what's good for him. How does it make it feel for him? And does he believe it's going to make him money? Just in the last day, I think 24 hours, it's from, I think it's from the State Department, American State Department. Trump has said he wants to not only take over Greenland, whether it's through economic or military force, but then he wants to rename it Trump land, which I totally believe. And I really do believe this. And he actually showed a map, with Greenland as Trump land. We're dealing with a 6-year-old. In a grown man's body who is probably also suffering from dementia. And
David, I have to ask, is that real? Did he really show a map?
Yes, he did.
Where it said Trump land?
Yes, he did.
Holy
yes,
shit.
he did.
I missed that.
We all have to believe everything. Before, until recently, people keep saying, well, it's Trump being Trump. Trump being Trump is a dangerous lunatic. And I think that was the exact quote from The Atlantic, an article yesterday. He's a dangerous lunatic. He's not just some guy that is walking around in his pajamas and you shouldn't listen to him. He is a guy walking around in his pajamas, but we have to listen to him because he's the president of the friggin' United States. He's got a nuclear arsenal and a huge military behind him and sycophants and cult members that are doing everything he wants. There's no checks and balances. The Supreme Court's basically a rubber stamp. And yes, I know I'm going off, but things are getting worse here every day. He's thrown out martial law again. That's going to happen. He doesn't say anything without eventually doing it.
And it's interesting, David, because you just said something really fascinating here, which is the nuclear angle. Putin weaponizes and uses nuclear threat all the time, as did the Soviet Union. Oreshnik was clearly a sort of, well, we know this is going to have much impact, but it has the optics of being a nuclear capable missile, right? So they use that all the time. It seems that either someone hasn't really explained to Trump, or this may even be a mental red line for him. He hasn't used the nuclear angle as far as I can tell at all. He's used tariffs as a weapon. He's used everything as a weapon. He's decided that the Trump Board of Peace is a great way. It's like the UN, but it's got my name on it. So again, it fits into his branding background. I wonder whether he just hasn't realized that the nuclear thing maybe would be the very best extortion tool, or whether he actually has some actual off-limits stuff, or whether that blows his chance for Nobel Prize out of the water. And
no, he has no off-limits.
Vaguely aware of that.
Yeah, let's get over that. He has no off-limits stuff. I think, like a lot of children and slow thinkers who like to look at animals and documentaries, he's afraid of the entire atomic idea. I think it truly makes him afraid, just like a 6-year-old. He doesn't understand it, but he knows it's very, very bad, and it's beyond his comprehension. So he's got so many other tools that he can take out on the world. That no, I just don't think he thinks about that. That's my opinion, anyway.
Jason.
So, I mean, I don't think it's a good question why he doesn't use it. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, he did say he's going to send nuclear submarines towards Russia last month when Medvedev upset him. But yeah, you're right. In general, he doesn't. That being said, it's hard to guess why that is. That could be the nuclear option. If he really needs to, he'll do that. But in the
He
short
tells
term,
the story about a relative who was a nuclear scientist. Now, whether that's true or not, but Mary Trump, who psychoanalyzes him a lot, says that maybe there really is something in his education that tells him this is a bad thing, and just not to go there. I mean, it's quite an interesting one.
it could be. I mean, it's once again, we don't know why the guy does what he does, but I think a lot of the things that we see, look in the last like 72 hours, the letter to the Norwegian PM about not getting the Nobel Prize, Trump land, as you just highlighted. You have to wonder. Listen, these things are so ridiculous. You know it's going to make a headline when you do it. Why would you do it? You're so first. I don't think he's stupid enough to not realize it'd make a headline. He understood that. So why would he do it other than the fact he wants to make it a headline? That is the objective. Why would you possibly say I can't rule out military force for so long, if then earlier today, an hour ago, he said he would never use military force? Why would you do that? You knew you were going to make a headline. You knew this was going to create a scandal. But like a narcissist, what is your objective? It's to be the center of attention, right? So you realize you can successfully achieve your objective. And that's why I say I don't think that there's as first. So that is strategy. To be fair, that is strategy. But that's not strategy in the sense I think many people give him credit for, which I don't, which is that it's part of a global order is trying to create like Russia. That he has some plan for this. Oh, come on. You think he's really thought about that before? I don't think he invests so much time and energy to think about these sorts of big picture things. I see no evidence that he thinks about big picture things whatsoever. He views it all just sort of as a joke. I mean, and by the way, just read recently his interviews where he said about canceling elections. He's not going to cancel elections first. But secondly, now notice how he's brought it up in every one of those conversations. When an interview is not going great, or it's something where he wishes to get off with like Epstein, say that. Guess what the journalist is going to say? He's going to cancel elections. Does anyone talk about Epstein? No one talks about Epstein. Look at every time he's gone off at a reporter and said, oh, she's a fat cow, or said absolutely absurd in the middle of an interview. Why would you do that if you know that's going to be the top story? Because it's better than his actual quote, which then gets buried. And so every time he gets into trouble and he realizes things are not going his way, he says something so off the wall that'll dominate the news cycle. And he does that successfully. And he's done this now for years and years. So, I mean, in my eyes, I think that it's just, it's a very cheap, it's a cheap ploy that he's used successfully now for years.
Do not underestimate him. How many things that people say that he will never do that? It's just Trump being Trump. And here we are today. I tend to agree.
I don't think he did anything. What did he do, though? I don't see anything radical done.
I'll say again, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think when we talk about the things that he said he has done that really upset people, such as canceling elections, such as invading militarily a country, he hasn't really fulfilled. He talks a lot. He says a lot of stupid stuff. He does very little. I mean, like in actual terms, I can't think of very much he's done that's really phenomenal, good or bad. He doesn't do anything. He talks. If
how about military on the streets? How about giving a $1 trillion budget to ICE? How about all of the crazy immigration-related tactics that have been going on for the last several months? He said he was going to deploy troops to the streets of America to keep us safe. He's doing that, and he's doubling and tripling down on that. I agree with you, though, Jason. I don't think he's going to cancel the elections per se. I believe he's going to deploy the military to supervise the elections, and to possibly seize voting machines. I don't put anything past this guy. He does not want to leave office, and the people that are supporting him do not want him to leave office, or certainly for MAGA, the Republicans, to lose control of the Congress. And I think they'll do whatever it takes to stay in power.
You know, I don't really think so. And I think that if you look at his last campaign, it's very clear he didn't care about the outcome of the election for the Congress and the Senate. I mean, throughout their campaign, they refused to open campaign offices in the rest of the states. They refused to allow any of the money to be diverted for the Congress. And they realized they had a good chance of losing the House and the Senate, and they didn't care. They weren't willing to divert even a little bit of the money or the time from him to do it. They said the only thing that we care about is the White House. And I think so. They've never, I mean, at what point have you seen him really give a concern about Congress? I don't think he really cares. Once again, what's his objective here? Is he a political party leader, or is it about him making money? If it's about him making money, what does he need them for? I mean, the people just sort of fulfill the role that they have to fill. But for the other things, I mean, like ICE, for instance, to be honest, it's okay. I mean, he's sending the cops to enforce the law. I don't like the tactics either, but I wouldn't say it's the same as invading Greenland, starting a war with NATO countries that could very well turn into the collapse of the global economy. It's quite a bit different. I don't think he's willing to take any serious risk. And then we see that with Russia. We see that with China. He doesn't take serious risk. He takes no risk.
Well, he doesn't want, you say, how can he make money? He only cares about making money. Absolutely, I agree. But if he's not president, or if he is in prison, or at least there's court cases that are trying him and putting him in prison, he's not going to make money. If he's out of the White House, he loses power. He's not going to be able to make money. He will do anything to stay in power.
But David, one, he can never be prosecuted for anything, because when he leaves office, he'll give himself a pardon. That we can be sure about that. So we can be absolutely certain there's nobody in this White House who will ever face any sort of justice. Never. In a million years. We can't hope on that. Look at all of our social security data, which we know at this point was taken by Doge. It's been used now by private companies. It seems that foreign companies or countries already have it now. All of your income data, all of your healthcare data, it's already been given over to foreign countries. And that's gone forever. But whoever did that is definitely going to get a pardon. So there'll be no punishment for it.
No, I absolutely agree. I just think, I don't know. I just think that Donald Trump / MAGA are never going to intentionally, willfully give up power, period. You can, say what you want about that. That's what I truly believe. And I think it's been borne out every day with every new catastrophe in this country.
And anyway, all the time, the mechanic works, which is deflecting attention from Ukraine. I mean, we've proved it here. We haven't yet talked about Ukraine. And it's understandable why, but Davos has been totally taken over by this. The global media has been taken over by this. I know, Jason, your story is cut through on YouTube because you tackle things like the Russian economy, and you really seem to sort of hit the vein of really what activists are looking for here. They want to know what's happening in Russia. They want to know that it's weak and that will eventually be defeated, which I think we all subscribe to that view. But on a broader picture, it is really tough cutting through in the mainstream media because of all this oxygen being absorbed by Trump. Whatever his strategic intent, it succeeds because it dominates the headlines, dominates the discussion, dominates the podcasts.
Right. No, I think you're right. And so, I think that Russia, if we think about Russia as a country, one thing that we've discussed this many times, I won't repeat everything, but one thing that Russia realized many years ago is that after World War II is that simply to wage a conventional war is expensive, high risk, and they've actively avoided that since World War II. You'll say, how about Ukraine? I think that Ukraine is quite obviously, and their objective was to have this 3-day military special operation where they'd swoop in, change out the leadership, and everything would go great because they said 75% of Ukrainians want to join Russia anyways. This won't be a problem. So that was a miscalculation. But either way, generally speaking, they avoid military conflict because it's simply easier to do things like use Wagner Group to rent them out to other countries or to use them for specific sources. But moreover, to control countries through the decision-making of those countries, reflexive control. How do I get my enemy to do what I want him to do, which is in my interest? And I think that's something they're very successful at, because you look at how often they manipulate foreign countries to do things that are inherently against their interests, whether it be, in the case of the United States or Europe, we see both where Russia does it. Now, to get to the point, though, is overall Donald Trump at this point does a lot of things that give Russians great ammunition. We've seen the support that he's gotten from Dmitry Medvedev 2 days ago, who said, Donald, you better hurry up on Greenland and take it. It's a great idea. You absolutely should do that. The fact is there's unverified information that within the next couple of weeks, they might have a referendum to join Russia. So this is your only chance to get one little new star for the U.S. flag. And I thought it was really funny at first, but in retrospect, I'm like, I don't think he's mocking him. I think he's trying to goad him into it. I think he's actually trying to goad him into it. And the Russians are going like, he might actually do it. Let's see if we provoke him. What do we have to lose on this? This is wonderful. This is obviously something that Russia thinks is great, because today, who's talking about, and actually Zelensky said that last night, who's talking about Ukraine today? Nobody is. Nobody is. This is totally distracted from everything else that's going on. And to be fair, I mean, with these events, I understand why, but it is unfortunate because, Ukraine continues to suffer. Today in Kyiv, I mean, this morning in the apartment, it was, one of my friends has a thermometer inside the apartment. They said it's 8 degrees Celsius. So it's like, what is 8 degrees? I don't remember, 42, 43 inside the apartment, Fahrenheit. And they said, this is what we're living like. It's absolutely horrific, the current situation. There's no running water. There's no hot water. There's no cold water. There's no electricity. There's no internet. There's no anything. It is a really difficult situation. And the people really are suffering. And what are we talking about? Is some guy over here who's essentially conning the world into believing he has a threat so he could shake them down for money. But realistically, that's what we have to deal with. Historically, though, I think it's, as far as foreign policy in the United States goes, it is important to note that Donald Trump, if you look back historically, he doesn't fight people who can actually beat him. So even when we look at corporations, like his lawsuits, look at his many lawsuits. And I've never actually studied this per se, but I've noticed a tendency is that he usually goes for people like contractors who he owes $100,000 to, 200,000. Small change for the guy, but he likes to go after them. Why? Because he can bankrupt them. He knows he can win in court because they can't afford the legal costs that he can just force. And ultimately, they'll spend more to recover that money than they'll get back. So they end up dropping the case. He likes that. He likes to be sort of a bully. But he doesn't like to get into conflicts with somebody who's bigger and stronger than he is, because then he could actually lose. And that's not so good. So I think in this case, he likes to do things like attack Denmark, Greenland. Well, how many soldiers are in Greenland? What can they realistically do? No, physically, yes, you probably could take it. And that's what he likes. But with Russia, that's a risk. And that's why I see that he doesn't try to antagonize the Russians in the way that he antagonized Ukraine. Why does he beat up on Ukraine all the time? Because he realizes that he can and he can get away with it. And yeah, you look like a bully, but in his eyes, it makes you look stronger. But who are bullies inherently? But people with weak egos. People that are normal don't have to do that. People that are normal can understand the value of the argument, not have to look at, oh, but now I feel better because I took power out of this person, or I oppressed this person. Now I feel better. It's very sick pathology, but it's the one, unfortunately, that he lives with.
Jason, the reason I wanted to have you on here first and foremost is because of what you just said, that Trump is taking the air out of everything. And I'll say for me at least, have been negligent in not discussing Ukraine enough. And that's why you're here, because we need to. I've been reviewing your latest podcast again. And please let the audience know about the recent horrific attacks that have, you just mentioned, left the residents of Kyiv in the cold and the dark. Russia's just been pounding Ukraine for the last, forever, but certainly it's increased in the last several weeks. What's the situation there with the attacks and the energy infrastructure?
So throughout the country, Russia has systemically attacked all the energy sources. Strategically, is more wise this time, is that they went after some of the different things that are very, very hard to replace. But either way, these attacks have led to a significant part of the country not having electricity. When they do have it, it's for maybe 2 or 4 hours a day. In Kyiv, it's typically between, let's say, 1:30 in the morning to, say, 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. You'll have electricity. So that means that everybody in that section of the city has to get up and do all the cooking for the week during that time, or the laundry or anything else. It has to be done in that brief period of time to shower, because otherwise all electricity and the water is cut off. The people are quite literally freezing. There are people dying from the cold. There's no heating. The heating centralized in the former Soviet states. The government has this pipes throughout the country that go through all the different buildings, and they heat it. But once those are destroyed or unable to produce, it means people then freeze to death. And that is something that is occurring throughout the country. But the ice also coming through on people's houses is a problem, because the stairwells that are communal, say, to apartment buildings become all ice, and people fall down those and die. It's pretty bad. It's pretty significantly bad. It's never been a situation like this before. But this is, once again, Russia at this point understands that it cannot win militarily. It's taking incredible losses. Over 1,200,000 Russians killed or injured since the beginning of this war. And with it, it gains what? In Pokrovsk, currently, the loss ratio, it was 15-1. Currently, it looks like it's even higher. It might be 25-1 loss ratio, Russian to Ukrainian. That's just astounding. That's absolutely incredible. That's absolutely incredible. So if you realize you can't win there, you need to have some sort of a paradigm shift. You need to have a game changer. But a paradigm shift would not be another attack on the battlefield, because that's the same thing again and again. A game changer in this case would be something like the Ukrainians are so far behind, they're so freezing or dying out, that they have no option but to negotiate. That's what Russia's trying to do. Now, on the other side, what was a game changer for the Ukrainians? Remember when they started attacking the oil refineries inside of Russia? The objective is what? To make it impossible for the Russians to continue waging war, to take away their capacity to continue waging war by destroying their economic system. And they are doing that effectively. But that's why today Russia, I think, is desperate to find some sort of new leverage. And that new leverage happens to be attacks on the Ukrainian civilian population.
Well, what the Russians are doing, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one that said this, of course, is that what they're doing now with the energy infrastructure of Ukraine is what Stalin did during the 30s with Ukraine, in starving the Ukrainians to death. He's right now, Putin's trying to freeze the Ukrainians to death, all of which is a huge war crime and crime against humanity. And yet the world, pretty much shrugs. And it's just intolerable. I don't know what else to say about that. This is a massive war crime going on every single day, and nobody's doing anything about it for the most part.
Now, unfortunately, the world doesn't pay attention to it. The situation is getting worse. There's a great deal of human suffering. And unfortunately, many people are distracted by Donald Trump's temper tantrums. and other issues. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. Is that if the world really wanted to end this, it takes nothing. The European countries tomorrow can start boarding the Shadow Fleet. They pass through Europe. They could easily, and they have the legal right and obligation to do so. I mean, they're not seaworthy. They violate international law. I mean, you have the obligation to enforce the law. So there's not a problem for that. But unfortunately, the European countries are unwilling to do that. Let's take the U.S. out of the equation, because I know everyone likes to talk about the U.S., but Europeans can't just blame the U.S. for why things aren't happening. There's a lot of responsibility they have, and they could definitely be taking action if they wish to. But everybody here is unwilling to do so. And we've seen that routinely. And that's one thing where, unfortunately, we see more and more, is that the Europeans, and I appreciate everything they've done, of course. But that being said, when we look at Donald Trump, when he said anyone that supports Greenland is going to get tariffs. Look how quickly, how many British soldiers went to Greenland? One. Look how quickly the German troops left. So there's European unity when it comes down to a serious issue. They all disappear. And today you have Russian ships going through territorial waters. What are you going to do? Stop them? No, we're not going to stop them. We'll let them go right by. What do your sanctions mean then? It means absolutely nothing. So the Europeans, I think, to always use the excuse, but look at what Trump's doing. That's just distracting from what you're doing yourselves, which is a lack of anything.
My dear God, Europe is still buying Russian energy and gas from Russia.
LNG. Yeah, I mean, it's weaning itself off, but it's like, come on, guys. We're in the 5th year of the war, and you've got a plan for 2027. It's camaraderie. Now, that brings me on to the other interesting thing, because, of course, the picture that Trump has wanted to create, which has been perhaps fed into him by Russia. This is one where a key part of their informational resource is expended on creating the illusion that Russia is eternal, invincible, and has inexhaustible resources. Now, that's not just aimed at Trump and its circle. That was aimed at Biden. That was aimed at all these geopolitical realist analysts, so-called, although they share no commonality with reality or morality at all. And it's aimed at the Western media. And this is one that cuts through over and over again, is the idea that Russia cannot be beaten. It's maybe one of the most successful narratives. However, to bring this together with what you've just said there, it does seem that Ukraine is saying, okay, if the West is not going to get serious, we know they're allies in certain respects, we're grateful for what they've provided, but the only people who are going to enforce the sanctions are Ukraine, and they're going to do it kinetically. Now, that brings us back to what is a unique occurrence that happened, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, and that was strikes on Greek-owned ships that are not technically part of the Grey Fleet. Is this potentially a sign here that Ukraine is going to say, well, thank you very much, everybody, but it's not working. We're going to have to take out Russian assets globally. We're going to have to take out all of the people who relied with the Russia supporting their war effort. I'm sorry, but it's now time to get serious.
Yeah, at this point, it's going to be interesting what happens. But it seems very clear, though, that there needs to be more. I mean, we know where all these ships are at all times. There's no mystery to it. We don't have to hunt them down. If we wish to get there, we could. But once again, it comes down to political will. And we've seen so far that there is a lack of political will on all sides. Political leaders, historically, not just in this case, do like to give speeches about the importance of things, then to immediately go on and do nothing to actually achieve those goals. But that's not new to this case. But in the specific one, it is tragic that it's been so many years. We know exactly how to stop Russia. I mean, Ukraine's blowing up these oil refineries for a reason. Destroy the Russian economy, there's no more war. It's very easy to end this. It's very easy. But unfortunately, we're not even willing to stop the tankers, much less to attack Russia. So if we're not willing to stop tankers, which we have the legal right to do, it's not provocation. Russia officially says this is not occurring. So you have zero risk. Why would you not want to do this? We choose not to. And it's routinely the case.
Jason, you've done some excellent podcasts recently about the security situation at the Kremlin, the fragility of the Putin regime. Would you talk a little bit about some of your writing and podcasts, which I call the Kadyrov factor? What's going on there? How might that threaten the stability of Putin?
So Kadyrov is the head of Chechnya, which is a region in the south that's majority Muslim. It's got a strong tendency of being separatist in nature, wanting independence from Russia. In fact, there's two wars with Russia, one in the 90s, one in the beginning of 1999, 2000, which was the second Chechen war. But in all cases, Kadyrov took over. He's currently dying. It appears he's in the hospital with kidney failure. His son, Adam Kadyrov, was supposed to take over after him. His other son, Akhmat, is the vice premier of Chechnya. But either way, Adam, who's the one who's been trained for this his whole life, I guess he's 20, 21 years old now. He was in a car accident just a few days ago. Local reports say it could have actually been an IED, which would, yeah, exactly, which is a pretty, would make sense. There's a lot of people that have an interest in killing him, because if you kill him, Chechnya as a whole, just historically and culturally, it's really into clans. The different clans and different groups fight with each other for power and control. And he came to power, Kadyrov, not through like really legitimate, I mean, by no means was it legitimate, he was just chosen. But why is that? It's because during the Civil War with Russia, during this independence war, his father switched sides and started working with the Russians against his own country's independence. Now, the people outside of Chechnya hate him. A lot of people in Chechnya hate him. He rules through force and through fear, but he's also consolidated all the power to his own little clan. If you realize you're one of these other clans and you can take power, why wouldn't you? So that creates a problem for Russia in a very big way on two different fronts. One front is if they started fighting over in Chechnya, we saw Russia in 1994, despite 2 years of fighting, losing thousands of soldiers, they were unable to stop. They were unable to win there. That's incredible. Just think about that. That is the entire Russia against an area that has 1.5, 1.6 million people total. So it's a very small area, and yet Russia couldn't conquer them. But then you move forward and you say, well, why would Putin care about that? Okay, domestic problems, let him fight it out. Well, it gets more severe because Vladimir Putin has three major security forces. One's called the FSO, which is Federalная служба охраны, Federal Service of Guards, what would it be in English, Jonathan? Guards. And the other one is the which is like Secret Service. The other one, though, is the National Guard, Nacgvardia, which is headed by a guy named Viktor Zolotov, who used to be his bodyguard, who's a close friend of his. But he's allowed them a year ago, to start getting tanks in Moscow. Why does he need tanks in Moscow? Well, after the Prigozhin uprising, they realized it'd probably be good to have these so-called National Guard, have things that have military conflict, because you don't need tanks to put down protest. You need tanks to fight off other armored divisions. And in this case, that could be people like the Prigozhin folks. So they're worried about that. That's why they're allowed to have tanks, which is something the military didn't like. It's something the intelligence service didn't like. But there's a third factor here. Let's imagine that there's betrayal occurring within the FSO. And that betrayal most likely would tie into other things going on inside of Rosgvardia, the National Guard. So he needed outsiders, the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard, in his case, are the Chechens. In fact, there's an entire group, and we're not really clear how many, but it's a lot of Chechens that keep in Moscow, just living around the city in different parts. And their objective is essentially, if there's an uprising tomorrow of some sort, that they would have no problem to just machine gun the people there. Ethnic Russian soldiers, they fear, might start to have qualms or start to worry if they start killing their own people. If they realize, look, all these babushka are gathered in the streets because they demand food, we can't just mow them down. Whereas the Chechens would have no problem doing so. And so that's why you keep them around, is to make sure that blood will be let and there will be no remorse for it. The Chechens have that sort of a reputation, but also because given the history with Russia, it does make a lot of sense. But he keeps them there. Now let's imagine this. If there's a civil war in Chechnya, those Chechens aren't going to stick around Moscow waiting to see how it turns out for Putin. They will go back to fight their clan warfare within the clans to see who takes over. And that by far is a higher priority for all of them. So to control the situation there, it means one of two things has to happen. If the situation deteriorates further and Adam Kadyrov, in fact, dies, that would mean that Vladimir Putin would either have to invest a lot more money to control the people in Chechnya and then control the leader there to buy him off. Russia currently finances about 94% of the expenditures of Chechnya. It'd be a lot more, though, in personal corruption that you'd have to give out to these people to guarantee the stability. But second to that, you'd probably have to send National Guard. National Guard, as I just said, are the ones that are in charge of internal logistics and security in Russia. If they were actually sent, though, to Chechnya, that means that they're no longer located inside of Moscow, which puts Putin in a bad position. At the same time, the Chechens who are supposed to be inside of Moscow defending him are not in Moscow. That means that Putin is totally dependent on people he doesn't really trust, like the FSO, which are from the KGB background sort of thing, FSB structure today. But the security structures, I should say. But there he has to worry because there's definitely been some shakeups. We've seen the number of Russian military officers arrested in the past 2 years. It's been extraordinarily high. In fact, they've arrested so many of them, and one's in very strategic positions. 15 out of 17 generals arrested worked in logistics. Why is that interesting? Well, logistics and also acquisitions, because those are the only two jobs that have direct money, and you're in charge of making expenditures, and that's why they want to take them over. But the one general who they arrested, who's the most interesting, I think it was Popov, if I recall, he was in charge of promotions. Now, why that's really interesting. So when you search somebody's house who's been arrested for things like corruption and promotions, you'll typically find the Chornaya Kassa, the black cash register, the black register where they write down things like bribes. This guy paid me 200,000 for this job. That guy paid me 800,000 for this job, or this kickback from that contract. You have to actually write this down because you have to remember how much they paid you. It comes in installments or whatever it is, but you have to actually write it down, and they do. And so undoubtedly, the FSB would have uncovered that during the search of his house. That means they would have had compromising material about essentially the entire senior officer class of Russia, which at this point means that they're all compromised. And if you realize any day you can be arrested, you're not going to really work in the interest of the military. You're work at whatever the FSB tells you to do. And the FSB right now has a racket. They're making a lot of money from things like the the Shadow Fleet, but also in the illegal transport and sale of oil. But they also make a lot of money doing things like shaking down other people, but also the military-industrial complex. That's historically owned by other people like Shoigu, who was a former minister of defense, but he's been pushed out. His deputy, Timur, he got 13 years in prison for corruption. But all of them have been pushed out. But who's taking that over? It's the FSB clan. So the FSB, of course, has different clans within it, but we'll just say it's one for the purpose of this, because it is like one major structure than there's minor structures. But if you look at the fighting that's going on there, it's indicative of the fact that, yeah, there's definitely some tensions. And I think that people are fighting over what will come next after Putin. Putin is, 73 now? Eventually, he will die. But when he does die, who will take over? The actual line of succession in the Constitution says prime minister. Nobody can tell you the name of the prime minister of Russia because he doesn't matter at all. He's totally just a figurehead. So the reality is it'll be someone else from within these factions. And to be able to best position yourself, you have to do what they're doing now, which is get rid of the others who could challenge you, like the military. Get rid of the senior military leadership, prevent any chance of having an uprising or coup or anything else. But also just remember what Stalin did to Zhukov, the great general of World War II. Remember what they did to a lot of the great generals, for that matter. Look what happened to Frunze after the revolution, for that matter. But either way, I digress. If you look at what happened to these different things, this is common in Russian history. It's repeating just all over again. And this time, though, I think it is indicative of the fact that there's strain within the system, destabilization within the system. The FSB is arresting a number of oligarchs. It's taking over all their assets. And they actually usually arrest oligarchs now, like the one in Dagestan, whose name escapes me, Magadomov, who they arrested just recently. He gave away, I think it was with $1.8 billion port. He was arrested. He was less than 24 hours in cuffs before he signed an agreement that the state should nationalize his ports. And guess who's going to minister that? The FSB. So, I mean, I think that this is sort of the way that things are functioning on Russia, but it's indicative of the fact that, yes, these different groups, these different clans are fighting. And I think that the Chechens are being manipulated into this, or it could be, it could be organic. The clan fighting there might start breaking out.
And, we see that in the private sector as well, with businesses being nationalized, not really, passed over to regime insiders. We see actual businessmen, because in the 90s and the early 2000s, Russia had some genuine people that are quite skilled at business. It's not all corruption. But of course, these people are especially vulnerable, and their enterprises, when they're taken from someone who is a professional, semi-professional businessman and given to a regime loyalist, they're not going to function very well as businesses moving forward. So this seems a particularly short-term, parasitical, rapacious kind of strategy where you might be able to cash in the short term, turn some assets into liquidity, but you're basically trashing everything as you go along. And that also includes, let's say, what we've recently found out in the last week, that Russia's gold reserves are being sold off in big gobbets of gold,
Yes.
meaning that the cupboard's going to be pretty bare soon.
So, and by the way, the gold sales, I think, is particularly fascinating. I have a hypothesis, which I cannot prove yet, but I will one day, is that I think the gold sales are twofold in nature. One, okay, the ruble itself, we can't look at the exchange rate and assume that's the real value. And I'll start with that, just so there's context to what I'm saying. So when you have, like in the Soviet Union, 1 ruble had incredible value if you looked at the official exchange rate. But the ruble really didn't have value because you're not working with a fiat currency. You're not working with something that changes day to day. It was pegged. It never changed. But that's because their economy is entirely different than what our own was. Currently, obviously, the ruble is at an artificial rate, because how many people do you know that would really buy or selling rubles at a normal day-to-day practice? There's very few people that are in the market for rubles. So what does this mean? Today, they're facing a lot of economic strain. We know that a number of the major banks are, in fact, lack liquidity. In fact, so many of them that in the United States, if a bank has more than 5%, let's say, toxic loans, it starts to already get intervention. There already supposed to be the government really deep diving on what's going wrong. In the case of Russia, the number of major banks that have more than 25%, more than 20% are toxic loans that won't get repaid. It's dramatic. That's why the central bank is to step in and give these repo loans, these short-term loans of cash, to keep them from having bank runs, to be able to execute a normal week's worth of trade. And for that matter, they put limitations on how much money you can take out every day. It's like less than $200. And they say that's, of course, for your interest that they do that. But the reality is they're doing that because they don't have the cash. If you come to get all your money out and everybody start doing it at the same time. But and I digress a little bit, but I want to give the background, the economic situation. So gold supplies. They're selling off the gold supplies because they say they need liquidity. Now, what's fascinating about that is if you need the liquidity, there's probably other things they could do with sell off gold. Gold is the last thing they have that is universal value. But what's fascinating about that specifically is that they said they officially sold it to China. I think it was like $90 million worth of it. The reality, or $900 million of it. The reality is there's a lot of estimates. It's probably 10 times more than that they sold off. I think they're probably also selling off the oligarchical class as well. And the reason I think that is, imagine you got tons of rubles that have no actual value. And tomorrow, let's imagine the central bank was no longer able to keep burning reserves in order to balance their value, their currency. It no longer met reality at all. In which case, what would you have to do? Well, in which case, at that point, you'd have to do something different. You'd have to, start using your gold supplies, but they can't do that. So why would Russia sell off their gold? Well, I think that those who are in the oligarchy realize this money, it's worthless. And I want to have gold. Because gold, no matter where I go next, if I, emigrate to Kazakhstan, or if I go to China, or if I go to South Africa, I can sell off my gold supply and it'll always have a value. Eternally, gold will have value. Rubles, not so much. And so I think that's actually a strategic move by the upper classes to diversify their portfolios to make sure that they have something that has long-term value.
You've written a lot about the economy, the Russian economy, over the last, a long time. How close, in reality, is the Russian economy to, I don't know if you want to say crashing, but getting to the desperation point where it may influence their foreign policy? Is it anywhere near that, or is it pretty stable regardless of what we're hearing in the West?
So, I'll let Jonathan answer as well, but I was going to say, so there's a few different things to say about that, and I'll try to be succinct. Is that first, it is definitely dying. It's definitely terminal. And I would say it's like when you go to a doctor, he says it's terminal. He might not say exactly how many days you have left and what time you're going to die, but he says, at this stage, it's definitely terminal. You're on the way out the door. That's the Russian economy. We see all the signs. It's imagine having this pressure cooker that's cooking, and we see it heating up. It's starting to shake. And you see the bolts start to fly off. It's like, well, when? I don't know, but it's definitely not going the right direction. And every minute, we see getting redder and redder and redder. We're going to reach a point where this engine is going to blow up. We're getting there. What day that's going to be depends on outside factors. A lot of different things could happen. They lost 20% of their national budget just 2 weeks ago when they stopped being able to sell oil in the capacity that they were to India and to China. But further, I think long-term, where we're going to see it really meet the road, there's a few different things are going to happen. One, the entire economy at this point runs on the military, which is why they don't want to see an end to the war. The war at this point is very profitable for a lot of people. Vladimir Putin himself gains from this war tremendously. As I've said a lot of the times, Putin's regime historically did not have a lot of his own relatives in it. That was not the way it ran. Today, it's definitely how it runs. He has 26, 27 members of his family who are in senior positions in the government, including his one niece, who is the deputy minister of defense. That means 41% of the national budget of Russia is going through her hands. But her husband is who? The minister of energy. So 40% of the income of Russia that goes into the budget comes through his hands. So they're taking cuts on both sides when it comes in and when it goes out. But he also has his relatives all over the oil industry and stuff like that. But either way, at this point with Russia's current situation, they're printing money. They're taking loans. This is the incredible part. They're forcing banks to give out huge loans. And of course, now this is documented, so it's very hard to tell what's really going on. But we think it's not 41% of the budget that Russia is spending on the military. It's probably closer to 50%. We don't know exactly how much, because the banks are told to give these loans to the government. They get bonds in exchange. So the government prints bonds. The government also, by the way, prints cash to buy bonds for themselves, which is sort of a pyramid scheme. But then they're getting these loans from the banks. Now, here's the funny part about that. When you get a loan from a bank, like if you come and you want to buy a car, and you say, with that car, I intend to, work as a taxi driver. Okay, well, I can imagine then how you pay us back, because over this period of time, we'll make money on this. It works out for everybody because you're producing a profit with that car. But let's imagine you make a tank and you send it off to Ukraine, it gets blown up 2 days later. That tank's not circulating anymore in the economy. It's not like you can resell it and somebody else can deliver pizzas with it and it'll still make money and still it generates revenue in the economy. It doesn't. It stops dead right there. And he can't even have the scrap metal to sell. So you gain nothing from that. how are you going to pay back a loan? The military is not in the business of deriving some sort of profit from what it does. It produces things that are perishable, that are consumables that are then destroyed in the war. That's where Russia has a real problem. It's depriving the banks of the liquidity they need and taking out so much from the reserves. And I think the actual downfall of Russia will my bet for how it all ends for Russia or for the Putin regime, the most likely scenario is one of two. It's either just a violent coup where somebody just kills him to take power, as I indicated earlier, or two, something like a banking collapse. When you have one bank that tips off the next bank, tips off the next bank, and has a collapsing effect within the banking sector. There's in fact a thinking, what's it called? What's it, not thinking group, what's it called? Think
tank.
Think tank.
Yeah.
Jeez, thank you. I was like, that think group does not sound right. So thank you. It's been a long day. So you look at this and you look at this one, and specifically next to the Kremlin, it works for Kremlin information. So it puts a rosier picture on things, but also has to give someone a realistic picture on things. And it estimated that Russia, this is about 4 or 5 months ago, if Russia was not able to get its current banking situation in order, it would face, quote, cascading defaults across the Russian banking sector. That is something that's dramatic. This situation for Russia is substantially worse than the United States before 2008. 2008 is also a big difference. The United States is the world's largest economy. People want the dollar. You couldn't balance that. You can get out of that situation. Nobody wants rubles. There's no way to get out of that situation. And so I think for Russia, they could realistically, seriously, face a total collapse, and it will be something that just happens one morning. We'll see that there's lines at different banks. The next thing, we'll see that the banks are forcing, bank holidays all of a sudden, and then it starts to accelerate. Then we'll start to see, I think, the wheels come off the bus. But is that possible? Yeah, of course. Historically, it's happened. I mean, look back when 1998, when the ruble collapsed. Look when the Soviet Union collapsed. This would not be unique for Russia's history in the past just 40 years.
And this is the last, I guess, area, as we're running out of time here. Here's a curveball. Here's an absolute curveball. It seems at least that China is as fully behind Russia as it ever gets behind anyone in terms of military support and economic support, buying its oil, etc., etc. Although, as you say, that's now been curtailed a little based on US secondary sanctions. What if China's playing a bigger game, which is to scare the world into, or let the world burn, while trying to maintain this idea that you might not like us, but we are now the stability. We are now the most stable economic and political power in the world, right? Make a deal with us. At some point, does Russia become a danger to China's big plan? And you start to see countries peeling off like Canada and starting to make that kind of deal, buckle under a new world order. We all would prefer to have a stable US and the post-World War order, but everyone now is realizing that's probably gone away and it's not coming back, at least maybe for decades, or facing this turmoil. At some point, Russia's kind of psychotic, rabid dog act is going to damage that and being associated with it. What happens if China just drops Russia like a stone? Then surely that could precipitate the collapse, and China maybe moves in to secure some of those territories for itself.
So, I think it's definitely going to happen. It's a matter of when, but I think the way that probably work out, keep in mind, China's trade with the Netherlands is 2 times more than its trade with Russia. Russia is an insignificant partner for China. Unlike for the Russians, quite the opposite, is a significant partner. But yeah, it's like 3 to 4% of trade with China is with Russia. Now, by comparison with the United States, it's about 15%. But either way, back to the point. What it would probably look like, I mean, looking at how China has historically operated, is that they're very good at one thing. They've learned from history that it doesn't really help you to occupy territories in the sense that you have to administer them. What's the best deal is you go in and you loot them and let them keep it to you, administrate it. So then you don't have to worry about the population. You don't have to worry about, fixing all the things or take care of the social security for these people. No. Much better. You go to them and say, listen, we will take over this territory and de facto have control of, let's say, Eastern Russia, where there's a lot of mineral resources, things like that. There's entire huge populations there. By the way, huge populations of North Koreans as well. But there's huge populations already there of Chinese. We will operate as we want. We will give it the exclusive rights to do what we wish here. But yeah, the day-to-day administration, dealing with the actual Russians that are there, that's your problem. We don't want to have to deal with that. We don't have to deal with, enforcing the traffic laws. You take care of that. But when it comes down to things like who gets to profit from this region, it will only be us for eternity. China would definitely make that deal because historically that's what it does. The Belt and Road Initiative, what I think it is, they're building roads across Africa and Latin America. We're building ports around the world. It's just they realize if you have the means, like they're going after now, the means of control, the means of the economy, that is everything. And at this point, they're effectively doing that globally. And Russia would be no different. At this point, though, Russia is still a useful idiot. Russia's still the guy who, as I've described Putin very often, Russia is to the rest of these countries sort of like the kid in class, the dunce, who everybody says, yeah, throw a paper, a wad of paper at the teacher, or throw a paper plane at the teacher. It'd be a great idea. And they all encourage him to do that. And as soon as he gets caught, they go, it's his idea. I have no idea why I did that. It's terrible. and he gets the one sent out of class. They use Russia like that. It's the idiot who does whatever everyone else does to destabilize the world system, which benefits all of them. They all enjoy this. And we'll sit there and encourage you to do it up until the minute that we have to pay the cost for that. And none of them seem to be willing to pay the cost for that.
Talking about idiots, it's amazing how America seems to be paralleling Russia and shooting itself in the foot and, destroying what it's built up over the last 100 years, certainly the last 80 years. Jonathan, unless you want to add something
you've
else.
You've got a regressive circle there. It's like one of these images, if Putin is the class, psychotic dunce and China's whispering his ear, then Putin's also whispering in Trump's ear. He's one layer down. You're doing what the dunce is telling you to do.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's about the level for Trump. Again, I think, Jonathan, you said we're just about out of time. We had a question, which I think, Jason, you did actually touch upon. The question was, what about if both Kadyrovs, father and son, pass on in the next little while? What's going to happen? I think you mentioned about the increased security risk to Putin and the Kremlin, unless you want to add a couple of thoughts to that.
Sure. For that person, I would just check earlier in this conversation because we did sort of get into that. But in short, I think there's two major things. One, domestic to Chechnya, would be that there is a serious risk of having clan warfare, which turns into a civil war there, which would then probably take the intervention of Russia to stop. But the second thing is that it provides for Putin a serious security risk in the sense that his own security is provided by Chechnya. The Chechens we often mock as being the TikTok soldiers, the guys who put all these videos online of shooting things, essentially shooting into the air, and claiming that they're in battle, but they're not actually in battle. Why is that? And actually, when the Prigozhin troops showed up, if you don't recall, the Prigozhin troops beat up the Chechens. The actual Chechens, the main units of Chechens, were 100 kilometers away. It took them 5 or 6 hours, and they weren't able to make it. They said traffic was too bad. What a joke! So the fact is, they're useless. But still, in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, they're his last defense, his last hope. The Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guards take cash. They're not there for fun. And if you're not willing to pay them, or you can't pay them, or there's clan warfare back in the homeland, you decide that's more important, I think you got some serious problems.
But then they're certainly up to assassination and gunning down protesters. I mean, that's the kind of odds that they'd be quite happy to deal with.
No, definitely. I mean, Chechens have a reputation for brutality, which is unique in this world. And I mean, seriously, if there's no other country I could think of that has such a strong association with absolute violence, especially in the case of Russia. I mean, and Jonathan, this is going back in the 90s, even talking about like Chechen assassins was a common thing. I mean, the guys who killed themselves were Chechens.
It's an Nemtsov assassin. Yeah, they were Chechens.
But you look at a lot of assassinations in Russia, they're done by Chechens because they'd be counted on to do things like that. But actually, look at the guy who got released in Germany. I can't remember his last name now. I'll come to me a second. In the last prisoner exchange, who was he? The one who killed the guy in the middle of a park in Germany? Chechen. Once again,
there was a shootout in Wildberries.
Yes.
Again, that's where the economic warfare, the blackmail comes to the surface, and of course you've got Chechen bodyguards shooting it out in the central Moscow.
See,
I think we're out of time.
Yep. Sorry.
No, please.
Last word to Jason.
You have the last word, Jason.
No, I was just going to say, I agree with both of you guys that the current situation is fruitful for Russia's interest in the sense that it's distracted from Ukraine. It's distracted from the actual national security priorities of the United States and the real enemies and threats that we have. And unfortunately, that's also current events are destabilizing transatlantic relations, but also domestic security for Britain and the European Union. And obviously, this is all having a very detrimental impact on Ukraine. Ukraine today is suffering a tremendous amount. And that's really, it's unlike at any other point in the war, by far. It has not been as bad as it is today, given the lack of heating, lack of energy, lack of all the basic services like water, which means that, diseases will also spread in the population at a higher rate. this is going to be really, really bad. And unfortunately, it's not getting the attention it deserves from the world because outside actors have decided to prioritize things like Greenland.
There's so much, as always, we haven't been able to get to. Jason Smart, thanks a lot for joining me and Jonathan today on the live stream, and we hope to have you back very, very soon. You take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who supported the channel through 2025, and all those, of course, who are contemplating supporting us in 2026. We've run many events on the ground in the UK, Europe, and indeed in Ukraine as well. And some of the images of those events are on the screen as you see this. Your assistance has been absolutely invaluable to making it happen. And in 2026, we won't be able to do this scale of activity, have this impact, or even think about having these ambitions without your help and support. There are many ways you can help. Of course, liking, subscribing, making sure you are actually subscribed to the channel, because sometimes YouTube seems to kick people off their subscriptions unexpectedly, but actually also adding comments and sharing materials around your network. It all has a tremendous impact. Now, I know many people watching this channel contribute to Ukrainian charities and do what they can, but aren't necessarily people of huge means. But if you can, if you're able to, and if you see value in this work, please do contribute if you can. We have links to Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and even GoFundMe. That is all in the description of the video. Any support you can give will make sure that we can have not just the same level of impact this year as we did last year, but we can actually increase it. And the aim, in fact, is to double our impact this year, to go from reaching about 1.5 million people per month with our content, doubling that to 3 million, and also doing many more events to help support Ukraine, help support the concept of democracy and resilience. And as we know, 2026 is turning out to be even more dangerous than 2025 was, and the existential threat to democracy, freedom, Ukraine, those aligned with Ukraine, is greater now, perhaps, than it has been at any time since the full-scale war. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for all of your support.